What's up, guys? Welcome back to Fett, episode 4, our Book of Boba Fett in review. My name is Kyle, your host. Welcome to Project Potter, guys. Appreciate you guys stopping by. If you haven't been to the channel before, go check out the other content, of course. But this is our review of every episode of Book of Boba Fett. I have been lukewarm at best on this show, guys, and I don't even know what to say at this point. If you haven't seen the show before, though, guys, we just do go over my quick thoughts on the episode and a score out of 10. So we'll jump right into it here, guys. So this episode, Boba gets his ship back, the Slave One, one of the coolest ships ever. This was not a cool way to get his ship back. Let me back up, actually, guys. This is where he meets Fennec, and he saves Fennec, and once again, the show is like trying to be like Cyberpunk 2077. I don't know why we're suddenly like pushing this Cyberpunk vibe, because it doesn't really fit with Star Wars. And I know we have to kind of get out of that mold of Star Wars eventually. Like, we can't just have the same sort of thing all the time. But I'm just like, I don't know if this fits, even though it's like Star Wars is futuristic in space and there's space travel, and realistically there would be definitely like a mod shop and stuff like that. It just feels like the last couple episodes or Boba Fett is like trying to like really like push this on us, like, hey, there's mods in Star Wars. Hey, remember Cyberpunk? Yeah, we're doing that too. It just feels very forced. Boba finds Fennec, and we knew that was Boba back in Mandalorian when we saw just the feet walking and they redo that shot. And she's bleeding out, and he takes her over to Mos Espa, I think Mos Espa, and then he goes to a mod shop. He's like, oh, no walk-ins, just appointment only. And then he's like, this woman's dying, and he puts the thing down, and the guy's like, why didn't you say that the first time? It's just like kind of goofy. And it's cool when he puts it in. Like, she has like a full like gut now of like pistons and shit going. It's cool. But he's like, oh, aren't you going to close her up? And he's like, oh, and hide all that beautiful machinery. I'm like, okay, I mean, I guess that's okay, but like Fennec basically is just open, and I'd never noticed this before, or she wears armor over it. I think she wears armor over it, but then he like brings her back to just like a fire pit, or like he's like living in the desert, I guess, on this big bantha that he's riding. And so she wakes up and she's like, what happened? And he's like, I saved your life. I brought you to a mod parlor. I'm like, okay, that's a cool idea. But again, it's like, we've never seen cyberpunk stuff in Star Wars, and that doesn't mean that we can't see it going forward. And obviously they have to introduce it at some point. But it just feels very forced, because we already got the modders, like the bike team that he's working with. And it's just, I just wasn't really into it, because it just didn't really feel like it belonged in Star Wars, or like, I feel like there needed to be more of a build up into this type of like world, instead of just like, oh yeah, Star Wars has modders. It's like, okay, I mean, yeah, probably, but it's just, I don't know, that felt weird to me, guys. But this is how he like kind of teams up with Fennec, and he's like, oh, I don't want money, but he's like, I need to get my ship back. If you could help me with that, your debt is paid. And so they go to this base with like the Morians and all these different creatures, and there's a little ball that she sends in there, and it like scouts it out, and he's like, oh, there's too many guards. And she's like, well, then we'll study the patrols and go in quietly. And I'm like, cool. They go in quietly, they take out 2 guards, and then they take out a couple of robots. There's like a knife guy scene, and then Fennec just slits its throat. And then there's like a little rat, the rat catcher. There's like a little robot too, and then he like holds it up, and he's like, I am Boba Fett. And guys, he says I am Boba Fett so many times, and I'm like, you're making it less cool, Tamora. Stop saying it. It's cool when you say it once. The more you say it, and this is what the show is kind of ruining for me, is that the more I see of Boba Fett, the less I think he's cool. Or like, it's not, I don't know, Boba Fett was so cool because he was mysterious and this badass bounty hunter, and we didn't know who's behind the face, or behind the helmet, I should say. And now it's like, even though Tamora is a really great actor, he is getting soft, like Fennec says, and it's like, I don't want my Boba Fett to be this kind, caring guy. I want him to be an assassin. But I don't know, he goes into later on in the episode, guys, he goes into about how like he's tired of being almost killed by idiots and doing jobs, and he's like, I want to start my own house. And that's all cool stuff. But the problem with this episode, oh, sorry, before I forget, guys. So when he goes to get the ship, he says there's too many guards, and then there's a little rat catcher, and he makes all the fucking noise in the world. Like, and I'm like, dude, we were going in quiet. And Fennec's like, oh, I'll guard the door, but then he just knocks all the shit over. And it's like, obviously someone's going to come in there, dude. And so they get to the hangar, which I thought it was way too easy for them to get to the hangar. They're like, okay, well, let's see if it can still fly. And then the guards start coming in, and then like all of them flood in. but it's just no problem because they can just kind of slowly. Boba goes in to make sure the ship works, but then he's like, he can't see anything, so he's like crashing through the building, and I'm like, what? And then he's like, oh, we have to open the gate, but I'm like, dude, this is your ship. You don't know how your ship works. Like, why don't you have like headlights on? Like, what's going on? Did they take the lights off? I was just like, what do you mean you can't see anything, dude? This is the ship that you've flown presumably for a long time. It's like, it's just weird. And then like they said there's too many guards, but then Fennec just shoots the thing, opens the gate, and they just escape. And I'm like, well, are there too many guards, or is it fine? Like, this show is just like, it's just a mess. And I really wish it was like tighter and in this case shorter in this episode. This is like a 50-minute episode, and there's just so many story threads where it's like that happens. I'm like, cool, we got a ship back. And then he's like, oh, okay, your debt is paid. I'm going to drop you off. And she's like, oh, well, I'll go along for the ride. And he's like, oh, I have some scores to settle. I'm like, sick. We get the speeder biker gang. And then he comes in and there's a sick shot of the slave one coming in, and he just fucking lights them up. And I was like, let's go. I was like, I'm 100% in. Like, this is sick. And then the next scene, he goes to the Sarlacc pit, and he like, it's cool because he like puts the ship kind of at an angle. And I'm like, oh, this is neat. But then he's like, oh, Sarlacc pit. He's like, that's where my armor must be. And in my head, I'm like, what? No, dude, the Sand People have or the Jawas have your armor. But then I'm like, oh, I guess he was mostly unconscious for that, so he doesn't remember them like stripping him. But then he did wake up for a second. I'm surprised he didn't say like, I think I saw the Jawas take it or something. It's just weird because it's like clearly the armor's not down there. But the fact that he's like, oh, let me put the ship into the Sarlacc pit, and I'm like, what? Because Fennec is like, it's going to be dissolved for sure. And he's like, no, not Beskar. And I was like, cool. But then it's like, okay, well, if Beskar can survive in there, then why they had to bomb the back? It's like, why wouldn't you drop that first? Because obviously the Sarlacc is still alive. Why would you think that the Sarlacc is dead, dude? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, did you forget already that you were in there and fighting for your life? And it's like, it's just like, what are we doing, guys? You followed that scene with the Sarlacc pit, and I was like, okay. And then he goes down into the Sarlacc pit after, with no armor or anything, and he's like all covered in slime. And she's like, oh, you need a BAFTA tank or whatever. But then they don't show how they get the tank. They're just in the tank. And then we go there, guys, and we get a flashback of him killing Bib Fortuna. And it's just like a quick scene where he just walks up and shoots Bib Fortuna in the face. And I'm like, really? That we spend all this time getting the ship back and going to the Sarlacc pit, but we don't show how Boba just walked into Bib's palace and shot him in the face and then just like threw him aside. I was like, dude, why is this a flashback? But we're spending so much time on the other stuff. It doesn't make any sense. And then we get the Chrysanthemum or whatever, the Black Wookiee. And I'm like, okay, but he's just like sitting there getting mad at the people gambling. And then he is like getting drunk, and he gets up and he starts like throwing them across. And then the woman comes over, and Boba's standing there. And she's like, oh, in the times of the gladiators, this was cheered for, but this is now seen as horrific. So she's like, don't you want to like be better? And then of course he rips the arm off anyway and then pays the debt. I'm like, what are we doing here, dude? Like, there's so many things that are just being thrown at this episode. And then he goes to leave, and Boba's like, looks like you need a job. And then the Wookiee does like a slow pan back, and I'm like, it's so weird, dude, because it's like Boba let you go, but you're still like kind of pissed at Boba. It doesn't make any sense. I guess like he gained his respect, but it's just really weird. And then we get a meeting with all the heads of houses or whatever that tried to overtake Bib, or they were like mad at Bib. And Boba has the scene where he's on the table. I think we saw this in the previews, where he's like, you all tried to overtake Bib or whatever, but he like outsmarted you or whatever. And they're like, what's stopping us from just killing you now? And they all turn to him, and then like the Rancor underneath like grabs out, and they're like, oh shit, because they like the table's like over the Rancor cage. But I'm like, this is a cheap, like, it doesn't answer the question, dude. It's like, look, the Rancor is scary, but it's like with the whole show we've seen that like no one respects Boba, and it's like Boba looks dope, but it's like he's really not, like, no one fears him, dude. And when they ask the question like, why do all of us just kill you, it's like, I mean, we haven't seen Boba, like, we know he's obviously like very skilled. We saw that in Mandalorian, but like, I don't know, they just made Boba look so cool in Mandalorian, and in this show, in his own show, they make him look like such a bitch. And I'm like, I don't understand why he's so weak. And it's just weird. And obviously we haven't gone to see Jin yet, but at the end, guys, we get this whole thing where he's like, oh, I have plenty of muscle, or I have plenty of credits, but he's like, I need muscle. And Fennec's like, well, we can buy muscle if you know where to look. And then we get the Mandalorian theme playing, and it's like, oh, okay, we're gonna go see Jin, which we already knew about. He was already confirmed. So even though I'm excited to see Jin again and probably Grogu, super excited for that. It's the problem I have with the show is that we already know what happens, right? Like this, like that's what the problem is with prequels. Is that except Rogue One was great because Rogue One enhanced A New Hope and it told this awesome standalone story. For this one, when he's getting the ship back, I was like, okay, well we've already seen him in the Slave One in Mandalorian, so we know he's getting the ship back. So I was like watching the fight and I'm like, well, obviously they're going to get the ship. It's not really exciting to me at all because they're just going to get it. It would have been much cooler to like have him try to get it and fail and then like have to buy it from or like something, you know what I mean? Just like something different than just like, oh, okay, well, we're just going to raid this place. Oh, there's too many guards. It doesn't really matter. And it's like, okay, we know he's getting the ship. And then they don't, like, he goes from like not having the armor because he's like, oh, I have to get my armor next. We just keep cutting back and forth between these weird things. And when we opened with the BAFTA tank again in the flashback, I was like, we don't need more flashbacks. Stop showing the BAFTA tank and stop going there. Luckily, they do say like he's completely healed in the BAFTA tank. So, but again, that kind of just felt like it should have been like the last episode or something. I don't know. We think we have 3 more to go after this. It's just, I don't know, guys. This plot is just all over the place, and it's just, I feel like every week I'm just like, there are a couple of moments where I thought were cool in here, but I'm just like, this plot is so messy, and I was really, really excited for the show, and I'm just like super disappointed with it. So with that being said, guys, as we go to the score here, it's a 6-2 for me. Nothing of consequence really happened in this episode. Again, we knew he teams up with Fennec. I guess it was cool to see how that he saved her life, but we kind of knew that because he found her when she was dying. So the modders, I guess, are kind of cool, but again, it feels very forced because we haven't had any indication that there are any modders in Star Wars, as far as I know, until this show where we've now seen it twice, and it's like they're throwing it on us, and it just feels very rushed. And the fact that Fennec is just like, oh yeah, I'm an independent worker, but then she's like, oh, but I'll stick around with Boba Fett. Also, guys, one thing I didn't like that I didn't mention before, Fennec wakes up and Boba doesn't have his armor or anything, obviously, and she goes, who are you? And he goes, I am Boba Fett. And I'm like, again, super cool the first time. Now you're saying it too much. They said Boba Fett like 12 times in this episode. And I was like, stop saying it. But it's like, he says he's Boba Fett, but he has nothing to prove that because she's like, oh, Boba Fett's dead in the Sarlacc pit. And he's like, I was in there. And I'm like, why would Fennec believe you, dude? You're just a traveler. She's never seen Boba Fett without his armor. So like, why would she think you're not just like a random stranger who is pretending to be Boba Fett so that he can take advantage of you or like take your credits or kill you or whatever? It's like, we know he's Boba Fett, of course, but she doesn't know that, and she just trusts him. And I'm like, all right. And I guess she can see that he saved her life, but it still is like, he's like, I'm Boba Fett. And she's like, oh, okay. Like, let me go get your ship with you. I wish he would have pushed back more and been like, how do I know you're Boba Fett? And then like he had some way to prove it. But Xanthan coming back, it was weird to him. Like, why did he freak out in the diner? It's like, it just shows that he's still uncontrollable. And then Boba's like, oh, come on my team, even though it's like, dude, you just saw that he doesn't really listen to orders, so why would you take him in? Just like they're going to go get Jin, and it's like, okay, are we going to see that scene again? I don't know. I'm excited for Jin because I know Jin and hopefully Grogu are going to be more interesting than what we've seen so far, guys. But yeah, I'm just super disappointed because it really just feels like they just threw a bunch of things at the wall and see what would stick with this show. And there's like other shows obviously in the works, guys. So it gives me less confidence for other shows. I think like the Obi-Wan show is going to be amazing because Ewan McGregor is a phenomenal actor. But it's really the plot with this one because I really like Tamora Morrison as Boba Fett. I really, really like it. I do think we're seeing way too much of him without the helmet. And so it's kind of taking away from, it's making me feel like Boba is just a dude, basically. And we haven't seen him be super badass. And he was a Mandalorian, but he's not in this show. And so I understand that it's a prequel. And so he's not like quite there. But then in Mandalorian, which we're seeing, well, presumably we're going to go see him go meet Jin right now. He's super badass and he takes out a bunch of stormtroopers and all that. But it's like, we haven't seen that yet. So are you telling me that he became a super advanced fighter within like from this episode to next one? I don't know, guys, but yeah, that's those are pretty much my thoughts on this episode, guys. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it more than I am. I'm still gonna obviously review the rest of these. I'm still a big Star Wars fan, so I like that we're getting more Boba, but it's also kind of ruining the character for me, where I'm kind of like, I wish, I think Boba is cooler when he's got more mystery. And so, not that I don't want character development or I don't want backstory on Boba Fett. I just, the way they're taking it, where it's like we're getting his ship in the first episode, the fourth episode, so weird. I feel like they spent way too much time with the Tuskens, and he does say like, "Oh, the Tuskens brought me in," and he's like, "I think it makes me stronger," because he's like, "We can't go far without a tribe," and I'm like, "That's cool." But also, it's like it's just the order of all these things where I'm like, well, I don't understand what they're doing, and it's like, I love Jon Favreau, man, and he's absolutely crushed it with Mandalorian and everything he's done in the MCU. But I feel like this is a big swing and a miss for this show, and I think a lot of people are feeling the same way. So anyway, guys, that's been my review, I should say, of episode 4. Thanks for checking out the channel. Like, comment, subscribe, and until next week, guys, I am Boba Fett.